we'll be talking about this rising Islamophobia in India. Now to talk about it, we have with us in our studio, on my right, is Lieutenant General retired Raza Muhammad Khan Saab. He's a senior analyst and a columnist. Thank you so much for your time, General Saab. And we have with us Dr. Auqaab Malik, expert in foreign affairs. Thank you so much, Auqaab Malik. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. And we also have with us Johar Salim Saab. He's our ambassador to Italy. And he's joining us from Rome. Thank you so much, Excellency, for your time as well. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Let me start off with you, General Saab. Whenever I read these sentences like death of secular India, I used to think maybe it's a propaganda because India is such a secular state and what a great democracy they have and look at the way they are moving forward and I think India is on a rise, India is on a move. But perhaps that was because of the Indian media and the kind of India they were showing to the rest of the world. But sir, in reality, once this RSS government took charge, Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister of India. Forget what happened in 2002 in Gujarat as the Chief Minister when he was in power. But currently, it's all about Hindus, and especially those who are extremist Hindus. Look at what is happening out there. It's Islamophobia at its optimum level. And interestingly, sir, if you're a Muslim, you are considered a traitor. Look at what happened in that cricket match, sir. Muhammad Shami was threatened because he was a Muslim. I mean, so many other players. I mean, why not Rohit Sharma, who was bowled out not only in this match, but in the previous 2017 final against Pakistan also on the first or second ball. But nobody talks about him. All the problems and cases are made against the Muslims, whether it's Azharuddin, or it's the Pathan brothers, or it's CAF, or you name it, all the Muslim players. So is this the way forward, sir? Or this is an absolute disaster for the India?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I think it was very unfortunate that this time the T20 World Cup has been politicized by India at the outset and politicized against its own players who have been their ace players in the past, unfortunately. But this is not something new, if you recall. They have used, the sports even as a weapon against Pakistan a number of times in the past. And they have even brought in terrorism. If you recall, the attacks on the Sri Lankan team in Lahore.
Correct, sir.
They were sponsored, by India. And now, very recently, the fake threats to the New Zealand team. The government of Pakistan said that, they emanated from someplace in India and therefore, they cancelled their tour.
Despite the fact they were giving the presidential level security.
They were, yes. So this is very sad and this is unfortunate. And more unfortunate is, the framing of charges against those Indians, I would say, and Kashmiris and Muslims who felt happy, at the very good performance of the Pakistani cricket team.
Put under anti-terror law.
Yeah, put under anti-terror law.
That is not even billable, sir.
For which they say that, they can get 7 years jail. Yes. And those poor students, who are actually celebrating, they've actually given some explanations also by saying that, when the Indians, when they were batting, so they've been actually clapping for them as well. So I think, and because Mr. Amit Shah was there in Kashmir,
exactly.
So I think he is the one who has pushed it. And the outcome is going to be more further alienation now of the student community of Kashmir and all the Muslims of India, because they have seen it now, with their own eyes, that no matter what you do for India, they will be actually called traitors, and there is no getting away from that. They have been linked in the past just by suspicion of keeping beef in their refrigerators.
Imagine.
They've been forced, to chant the slogans of Jai Shri Ram, and if you do not do that, then they are told to go to Pakistan. Recall, on 16th or 17th August, when there was the changes regime in Afghanistan, and some people were happy that, at least some change will come, some positive change will come to Afghanistan. Muslims were blamed for that, and they were told that, why are you doing that? You better go to Afghanistan if you are happy with whatever is happening in Afghanistan. And you know, their cry is that Muslimanon ke liye ek hi stan, ya Kabristan ya Pakistan, and now they've added even Afghanistan to that. So I think the international community, particularly the United States, needs to take a serious note of what they are doing. They should actually see, what they have done now on the cricket ground. That this is discrimination, this is racism.
Absolutely.
Extreme racism, and therefore they should not keep quiet about that. Otherwise, what is the world going to say about that? President Joe Biden came into power, and one of his pre-election manifesto was that human rights is going to be on the top.
Not a word about it yet.
Yeah, not a word about him. Even the Vice President Kamala Harris had talked about that, but even they're quiet about that. The U.S. Council of International Religious Freedom, they every year they have placed India as a country of particular concern. They've been recommending to the State Department to put the Indian politicians and also some of their military leaders, on some kind of sanctions, diplomatic and political sanctions. But the State Department is not listening. They didn't listen to it.
They won't even listen, sir. If you remember, Assam, which happens to be the second largest state in terms of Muslim population after Kashmir, sir. Yeah. And whatever happened there, which we all witnessed, the way that Muslim villager, I would say, was killed, and the way that Hindu photographer was jumping on his chest, on the dead body actually. Yes. And there was this huge number of men in uniform, so-called the police. Yes. Nobody dared to stop. In fact, they were the killers. So this is what is happening, sir. The lives of the minorities.
They don't matter.
That is
absolutely they don't
under tremendous pressure, and it won't matter in the future also.
And so let me add quickly to this. Probably the Indian team made gestures on the Black Lives Matter there in the cricket. They should actually now, and world over, the OIC countries,
minority lives matter too.
Yeah, Muslim lives matters. In particular, MLF. MLM. We should start that movement. I think Pakistan should take a start, and the rest of the OIC countries should follow suit. And even I think other people of the world, they should understand what is happening, particularly in India.
That's so true, sir. Now coming to you, Auqaab Malik Saab. Now I'm sure you must have been glued to the television screen watching the Pakistan-India match, and whatever happened after that. I mean, look at the social media, look at the Twitter, look at the kind of memes that were made. But sir, they were all funny when it comes from the Pakistani side. Nothing of that sort where we would criticize a particular segment. But sir, in India, it was the other way around. Hatred for the Muslims, and in particular for the Pakistanis, was so obvious, was so visible, that, nobody can believe that. How come the Indians, I mean, they've turned into these monsters, having such negative sentiments about the Pakistanis and the Muslims in India. The way they have criticized their Muslim players, in particular Muhammad Shami. I mean, nobody knows. If he goes back, somebody shoots him or something of that sort happens. Who is going to be held responsible, sir?
It's a very, very disappointing situation in India. I find that although against the protests of the Indian government, I think this is primarily planned to instill hatred against the Muslims. And Modi is known for this from many years before, when he was in Gujarat, and what he did to the Muslim community there. I think that lives on with him, and the philosophy that he has instilled within the Indian community, because he utilized that. He manipulated the idea of the Hinduvta, which was originally about the essence of living and in a peaceful manner, but has been twisted completely for the basis of Hindu nationalism, to the detriment of all the minorities in India. I think the Muslims are the largest minority, you could say, but other minorities are suffering, like the Sikhs and the Christians and the Buddhists and many others. I think that Modi himself wasn't able to really challenge the existing status quo when he suffered the elections, unless he did what, for example, Trump did in America. And that was to manipulate the situation on the basis of division. And that's not how you govern a country. You don't govern a country by dividing it. You govern a country by uniting it. And he's done the complete opposite. He's instilled this hatred within the Hindu community against the Muslims and reached back to centuries before battles and processes that occurred that are forgotten in history, ancient history. Yet he's instilled that and utilized these for his propaganda to manipulate the population, and largely illiterate population, by the way. That is his support base. And illiterate in the sense not just ABC literate and the alphabet, but historical and understanding. They've been manipulated through the through the media, and their mindsets have been conditioned. This is psychological warfare on a grand basis on its own population. This is disappointing at the most. And what is more disappointing? What is more disappointing is that the Western media doesn't cover anything. It is absolutely blind to what is happening. Yes, there are a few people who recognize what's happening, but the governments insist that there's nothing happening, that they're not covering the atrocities in Kashmir. They're not covering what happened after this game. You don't even know about it. I read up on lots of internet blogs about how certain commentators are appalled at the behavior of Indian population, for example, how they're attacking students, how people are going into homes and pulling out people, naming them, like you said, as Pakistani, which they're not, they're Indian, beating them up basically because they're Muslim. And this is the trend, by the way, in many countries. It's not just India, but it's more rampant in India. And something that must be condemned and must be raised at the highest platforms in the UN. But then I'm quite disillusioned with
even
the UN,
if it is raised, the interesting part is the world will listen to it or not. That's the point.
That's what I'm saying. I'm quite disillusioned with the UN. UN was created on the basis of the existing world order at the end of 1945. It doesn't reflect the way the world has moved. Decolonization, independent countries everywhere who have a right to exist. And their interests must be espoused as well. Do you get that? No, everything is vetoed based on the existing 5 permanent members. Yes, even India would argue about that. Yet, I think that the world is changing as well. In the Western world will excuse anything to maintain global power because it's been challenged by China. And they will support a virtually fascist regime in India, which is becoming more and more fascist every day as it goes by. And I'm a very objective person. I'm a very objective person because I've always been critical of everybody and every government and every action that's taken. If it was negative and against humanity, I would criticize it. And this is not me because I'm from originally Pakistan. This is me because I see what is happening in India and how democracy has been thoroughly degraded. And I fear totally for democracy in India completely for the next generation.
Auqaab, that is exactly what the next question is about, and that is for Ambassador Saab. Now, sir, will the world powers call out India's descent into fascism? And secondly, I mean, when Dr. Auqaab said that it seems more like a geopolitical or a economics issue, sir. Let's throw light on that aspect, sir. Since you are an ambassador and your way of looking at the issues, it has a very different perspective. Let's educate us on that.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'll echo the sentiments and the views expressed by the worthy panelists here. In terms of how the world views it, first of all, let's talk about the media, because media is the eyes and ears of the world. But I would say that generally, media ignores a lot of things happening in India, which if they would have happened in any other country, they would have been blown out of proportion, particularly countries like Pakistan, which are probably not really on the, on the right side of some particular powers, But on the other side, we have to remember that ever since this 2019, 5th August, Indian actions happened, I've seen unprecedented coverage of atrocities in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, more than I had seen in the previous some decades, I would say, over the entire diplomatic career. So that happened for the first 6 months, perhaps a year as well. But then gradually it started tapering off. The media lost interest. Now, at least the media took cognizance. So there was sort of, the buzz in the world was watching. But did it translate to action within the political leaderships of the important countries? I don't think so. There it was, as you noticed, was generally ignored. Okay, the human rights organizations, they took note. The Democracy Watch organizations, I remember, for instance, last year, in 8 of the biggest human rights organizations in the world, including Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, they petitioned to the European Parliament to take cognizance of what was happening in India. Of course, the European parliaments did not to that extent. Now, if we talk about the governments, then we see, we actually saw that, some sort of silence in key Western countries. Certain countries, in certain instances, spoke up. Of course, there were some statements, but very guarded, very cautious statements. I recall I was ambassador to Germany, for instance, and Germans had been sort of, there was not a lot of...
You can probably stay in the residence with the ambassador.
But sort of, I remember I took up this issue, particularly just before Chancellor Merkel's visit to India, that very famous visit to India.
He'll organise residence for us and full protocol. Comes in handy, isn't it?
Okay. So what happened was that, during that visit, Chancellor Merkel did speak about what was happening in the human rights aspects of violations which were happening in the illegally occupied Jammu. That was one of the rare instances. But on the whole, I would say, if you talk about the Western countries, if you talk about the Western parliaments, if you talk about the Western alliances, they have been largely ignoring that. And the reasons are obvious, because what are the reasons? The reasons are geopolitics, of course. India, there's this Asia pivot by the US, this Quad, as we sort of, this whole game which is being played on, and where India is seen as an important player. And of course, the other point is the Indian market. It's seen as one of the, it is an emerging economy. Exactly. It is now one of the largest economies in the world as well. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think many Western countries, they ignore because they want that market. European Union, for instance, some of the largest economies, like the UK, for instance, the US, Germany, France, you see that because they see that. And also they see it not only in terms of what the Indian market is worth right now. They also see it in terms of the
primarily,
potential.
So what I've understood that, when it comes to geopolitics or geoeconomics, these values and ethics and norms, they do not matter. Basically, it's your own interest and the interest of the other country. But sir, I'll just get back to you, Ambassador Saab. Let me also engage General Saab here. General Saab, a couple of points, sir. There were reports that the Kashmiri students, Muslim students again I'm talking about, they were attacked all over India, wherever they were in various universities. Now, don't you think that is the major humanitarian issue, sir, when it comes to, forget about the people living in Kashmir. And since we were talking about the presence of Amit Shah in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, sir, this man was the number 2, even when Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. And let's not only blame Narendra Modi for the killing of 2,000 plus Muslims in Gujarat. It was Amit Shah also. And the moment Narendra Modi came into power, he was his right-hand man. So we shouldn't expect the word in Urdu, as they say, we should not expect khair from him.
Absolutely. We need to understand that hatred of all minorities, particularly Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, and even Dalits, that is actually, the basis of the political strategy of the BJP and the RSS, because that is, that is what attracts votes for them. And this was one reason. Of course, add to that, the hatred for Pakistan. So it got them, 2 terms. But actually, India is treading on the path of suicide. I think the earlier they understand this, the better it would be, one. The second thing is that, continuously, since, the BJP has come to power, the truth of the two-nation theory is getting validated and revalidated time and again. And I think the people of Pakistan should know that how lucky we are to be independent today. And, if they imagine that at the time of partition, there were some people, some even Muslims who wanted to stay in a united India. So now they are realizing, that that thinking was absolutely wrong and disastrous. But that is now again being understood not only by the people of Pakistan, but also by the rest of the Muslims, that is something, which should actually now unite them. And unless they get united, they will be subjected to this kinds of brutalities. Again, the other important point is that the BJP and the RSS have, they have politicized the Indian armed forces, and they have been used for their political gains. And because their nuclear weapons are now under the control of the BJP and the RSS, they are actually in the wrong hands, and the United States and its partners and allies should be worrying about that. Even the OIC should be worrying about that, because to the Indians, not only the Indian Muslims, but all Muslims all over the world, they are their enemies, and you can expect anything from them. I would now like to, read to you. You talked of the human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says only one short para from that whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Unfortunately, this is not happening in India, and I think the earlier the West recognizes this, the better it would be. I'd also like to refer to the UN Human Rights Commission, UNHRC, resolution of July 2020, which specifically prohibits religious hatred and online as well as offline. Incitement to discrimination is again strictly prohibited in that. So the Indian government, I think they are now openly violating both these international regulations. And I think not only Pakistan, but OIC and Europe and the rest of the countries to whom human rights are very important, they need to understand that these are being violated.
Sir, nothing is being done, General Saab, on merit. Look at the way they have placed Pakistan again in the grey list, along with Turkey and Mali. I mean, my point is, sir, that, this ethic, which we call the ethics, moral values, these do not exist now. They used to. There was a time. But now, sir, it's more about the money, about the interest, about geopolitics, about geoeconomics, about geostrategy. So, Jal Saab, I'll just get back to you on this very important topic. We'll have to take a break here. After the break, we'll return and we'll continue our discussion.
Technocrat government will take the responsibility of running Sudan.
Welcome back after the break now. Jal Saab, if you allow me, sir, since we're running out of time, a couple of points that I want to raise, and I would like our friends in UK and in Rome to talk about it. Now, when we talk about this issue of human rights, sir, and that is really important and is something, Dr. Auqaab, which should be considered. I think this is the first right of any human to have that kind of life where he is not threatened. But, sir, if you look at the kind of visuals normally, I wish I could show them on air, sir, but we cannot because of certain restrictions of what you cannot show on the television screens. Sir, India, for sure, is not becoming, has become a state where extremism is nurturing. And interestingly, the one who is feeding this is nobody other than the Prime Minister, their Interior Minister, their Foreign Minister, their National Security Advisor. But I would like you to, in fact, reflect on one very important point. I was listening to about an hour-long interview, not an interview, it was perhaps a debate, and the former Chief of Army Staff of India, who is currently the Chief of Defense Staff, General Bipin Rawat, he was talking about the clash of civilizations. And he gave a very, very comprehensive, in fact, an idea about what could happen in the future. He said, well, the Japanese have their own civilization, Chinese, the Sinos as they call, they have their own. You talk about India, the Hindus, the Latin Americans, the Western, as we call it, this in fact consists of UK, Canada, America, Australia, the white man, the AUKUS representation is also something of that sort. And then he was talking about the African and then the Muslim. Now, obviously, Russians, the Orthodox, as I earlier mentioned, along with the Eastern European countries. Is this what seems to be happening in the future at some stage, sir? Is this what India is gearing up? How do you see this, Dr. Auqaab?
Faisal, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, because this is something which really touches my heart.
I know, I appreciate it. And it was a good idea. It was thoroughly debated via Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And I explained before that there is no monolithic, whole, undivided entity around the world, such as a civilization, like the Islamic civilization, or there's quite fragmented, or the Buddhist, and even the Hindu civilization, or the Japanese, as you mentioned, the Western civilization. Look at the atrocities that occurred in Europe when they massacred each other. Tens of millions of people died over the few wars last century. That doesn't indicate the united civilization per se, and that they would be united in future. Although, yes, we can understand the Crusades, where the Christians were invading Muslim lands and leaving havoc everywhere. And then, obviously, against the Chinese, the Brits, when they colonized China, how they treated them and degraded their structure and governance structure to a point of subservience in a way. But that was, as you mentioned earlier, it was all about money. It was all about personal gain. It wasn't about one individual, one whole civilization attacking another. It was European countries individually competing with other European countries to gain territories abroad because they had a competition within Europe. And unfortunately, the rest of the world suffered. That could be translated into actually what you're mentioning just before you asked this question, that things have changed, but they actually haven't. The world is still a mess. We're on a journey towards a better future. In fact, the relationship between India and Pakistan has been much, much worse previously. During wars, you remember these things, the wars that we've had with them. So in real terms, if you look at it statistically, it's not as bad as it was. However, having said that, the trend that is occurring in India at this moment in time is negative. And it goes against what we've been taught as we grew up, the idea of democracy, nurturing people, providing human rights to other people, believing in the idea of United Nations. And unfortunately, there's been a breakup of this. And a lot of people, a lot around the world, are beginning to recognize that was maybe the world is not ready for that yet. Because remember, it was United Nations were created when
Dr. Auqaab, the world will get ready, just like the world got ready for 9/11. There were two buildings which came under attack, around 3,000 people died, and the American president was ready there and then, which country to attack, whom to target, and what to do. Not for a year, 2 years, for 20 years. This is exactly what has happened. But sir, I'll just come to you, Ambassador Saab. Since India has been trying its level best to explore all the fault lines in Pakistan, whether it's about Shia Sunni or Hazaras or Balochistan or Sindh, Mahajar, whatever you may name it, and especially after 9/11 and being having a lot of presence inside Afghanistan. They did whatever they could have done. Now, sir, when it comes to the fault lines inside India, you talk about the ethnic divisions, you talk about religious disagreements, you talk about the minorities out there, or perhaps the division between the have and have-nots. That's again another problem. Do you think, sir, this was the reason CAA was introduced and forcefully implemented? Muslims were sidelined. Is this what the regime is thinking, sir, to make it a clean India only for the Hindus, by the Hindus, for the Hindus?
Well, that is the Hindutva ideology, as we know. And that is the ideology being propagated by the ruling party in India, unfortunately. And we see that exclusion of Muslims, the suppression of minorities, the suppression of rights, the CAA, for instance, you mentioned, even, and it's not just Muslims, for Sikhs, when they were protesting, the Sikh farmers were protesting, they were charged with this Khalistan campaign. When the Christians protest, they forced conversions against them. Some of them were burned to death. Other communities as well. Unfortunately, this ideology, and it has worked for BJP. We have to remember that this party basically prospered on this plank of anti-Muslim. This whole Babri mosque episode, and subsequently, of course, they came up with more and more issues, and the party started gaining momentum. So, because they see it as a formula which has worked and which they think would keep on working. Unfortunately, India is a country with a huge weight. And because of that, it can get away with some of the things which, if some other countries would have done, would not have been possible. This magnitude of human rights violations in some other country would have created an international uproar. But in India, it doesn't, because of its huge weight, its markets, its place in the international chessboard, so in the international power equation. Because of that, but I still think it's a very destructive policy, because you see, South Asia houses 24% of the world population, and South Asia could be the engine of growth for the whole world economy. It has so much potential, and India being the largest country there, it could have been something sort of what the US is in North America, or what Brazil is in South America, a country which is not hostile to its neighbor, a country which does not try to undermine its neighbor, a country which does not try to undermine its own people, the minorities. But unfortunately, that's not what we see in India. Behind this so-called shining India, this incredible India, beneath that, what we see is a very narrow-minded, a very fascist-minded regime, unfortunately. But that is the truth. And that is not what we say in Pakistan, but that is what a lot of people are saying everywhere. And I have to tell you, because this is important, that even in Western countries, within the governments, it's not that they're doing no publicly, but do you think they're done privately discussing it? They are.
All right, sir.
There are different schools of thought within the Western governments which are debating that point.
But so one thing which we have actually gathered from this conversation is that it is not only dangerous for India, it's dangerous for the entire region. As you just mentioned, that almost 25%, that is 1/4 of the global population that is living in South Asia, is under threat because of these policies and the draconian laws they have placed in Kashmir and elsewhere, and could be in Bihar or in all those states where there is a lot of human cry regarding these particular problems. I mean, what about those millions and millions of Muslims? Will they be detained or they'll be deported? Deported where? To Bangladesh? I mean, there are so many ifs and buts. But Jan Sahab, last quick comment, sir. Is India in particular, sir, heading for a disaster? Because at the end of the day, sir, 20 crore Muslims, almost a similar number of Sikhs all over the world, and or the other minorities included, sir. We shouldn't consider this as a minority, sir. Pakistan is almost is ready to get separated. Kashmir, look at the east of the chicken neck of India. Look at what is happening in the southern side, sir. Problem is everywhere.
I think India is surely slowly moving towards another partition. I have no doubts about this. If the BJP RSS regime continues, then this will move in that direction. And the world needs to be wary of this and recognize Indians' friend needs to actually foresee this. which is not good for them either.
Why would they care, sir?
Well, they should, because of the same reason that you pointed out, economic reasons. If India disintegrates, they wouldn't like that to happen. But I think there are a lot of expectations from the OIC. Look, 2 billion people, 57 countries, with a combined GDP of more than $25 trillion and 75% of the world's oil and gas in with them. It is their responsibility. They are supposed to be the collective voice as per the OIC Charter of the Muslim world. But they're quiet, unfortunately. I think they need to wake up.
Again, sir, vested interests. Yeah. That is what the name of the game is. It's
but collectively, even if the OIC, for some reason, cannot do it collectively, I think it is incumbent upon the individual countries to do whatever they can to save the Muslims of the subcontinent.
Well, let's see, sir,
yeah.
How things move forward. Rajal Sahab, it was a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you so much for your presence. Dr. Auqaab Malik, thank you so much for your participation. And Excellency, thank you so much that you also were a part of our show. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you, inshallah, again. Till then, you take good care of yourselves. Khuda Hafiz.